Okay, everybody, welcome to today's community health lecture. We're so happy to have everybody here today. Let's see. So my name is Michael Schmidt. I'm a librarian at the Foothills Branch Library, which is located right across the street from Midwestern University. And a lot of you know that the Community Health Lecture Series is a partnership between Midwestern and the Foothills Branch Library that has been going on since 1990. So we have a long history. And of course, we would normally do these lectures face-to-face, but because of the pandemic, we are switching over to this Zoom format for the time being, and we're very happy to continue being able to bring you lectures in this way. So because we need to comply with the library's privacy policies, we were asking that everybody leaves their videos turned off. We want to record this video. We're actually recording it right now. And so we'll want to use this in the future, and we want to comply with the privacy policies, so we can do that. I'll be taking questions via the chat feature. So if something comes up that you want to ask the lecturer about during the lecture, please send me a message in the chat, and I'll take note of that, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the lecture. So before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that next month's lecture is February 16th, and that is titled Rare Diseases, Not So Rare After All. Sounds like a very interesting topic, so you'll want to tune in for that. Again, that's February 16th, and I guess that's about it. I think we're all set and ready to get started. So without too much further ado, just want to let a couple more people in to the lecture here. So everybody's okay. So everybody's here and ready to go. So we're so happy today to have Dr. Jadavji, and she's going to be lecturing to us and giving us information on how nutrition changes the aging brain. So without further ado, I'd just like to turn the program over to you, Doctor. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
I can see it, yeah.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jadavji, and I'm an assistant professor at Midwestern University in the Biomedical Sciences program. My research focuses primarily on aging, diseases of aging, so things like vascular dementia, stroke, and so I'm going to be presenting some clinical data today. So this is just an outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain, what it is, what it's made up of, what happens when we age, how the brain changes. We're going to talk a little bit about nutrition and its role in aging. And then I've also compiled, and we'll also go over resources for future learning. I believe there was a handout that was emailed out this morning with the lecture details, and I'll just walk you guys through that handout. So what is neuroscience? Well, neuroscience is the study of the nervous system and related behavior. So neuroscientists like myself study how the normal brain functions, as well as what happens during disease. So when an individual gets sick with something like a stroke, or with a disease like Parkinson's disease, a neurodegenerative disease, or when an individual suffers from traumatic brain injury. And so that's what neuroscientists do. We try to understand how the normal brain functions, as well as what happens in disease states. So here on the right, I have an image that outlines both the central nervous system, so that includes the brain and the spinal cord, as well as the peripheral nervous system. So all these nerves throughout our body that collect information and send it to our spinal cord and brain for processing. So both the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system are very integrated in order for fast communication to occur. So for example, when you are cooking in your kitchen and your hand, I did this a lot when I first started to cook, I would accidentally touch the heating elements on my stove without realizing that it was quite warm, and you have this fast reaction to remove your hands or your fingers from that heating element so you don't burn yourself. So that's an example of how your peripheral nervous system and your central nervous system communicate. So here I have a diagram of the development of various organs in our body. So we have, this is from the time of conception until an individual is born. And we have different organs that are listed here. We have the heart, the upper limbs, the eyes, the lower limbs. And here we have time. So you can see sort of how long the development of these organs takes. And up top here, we have the central nervous system. And you can see that the central nervous system is one of the organs that takes the longest to develop. You know, it starts at time of conception with the closure of the neural tube, which becomes the brain and the spinal cord, and it continues until our mid to late 20s in terms of development of executive function and things like that. So why I am going over this is to communicate that the brain development takes a really long time, and because of this time, there's a lot of opportunity for things to change, or for there to be some damage that might change the brain. Great. So the brain is also very organized. And here we have a sagittal view of the brain. So what that means is if you were looking at my brain like this, so you were sort of a side view of my brain, and what neuroscientists have done is using model systems, so like animal models and things like that, what we've done is we've been able to understand what each part of the brain does and therefore organize it. And there's also been, there was a lot of work done in humans as well, patients like patient HM, who helped understand the role of the hippocampus. So what we see here is we see different parts of the brain. So we have something called the cortex, which is this really cool structure that has all these different folds, and it's a very complex structure. We have something called the prefrontal cortex, and so this is a structure involved in executive function that we see in humans. We have down here, we have something called the pons and the medulla, which then become the brainstem and then the spinal cord. And so our brain is quite organized in the sense that there are different areas that are responsible for different functions. So I mentioned this before, patient HM is a very famous patient who had his temporal lobe removed. This was done many, many years ago. And what researchers found was that when they removed it, he actually lost or had some sort of impairment in memory. And so this is how the discovery was made, in that the hippocampus, which is a structure within the temporal lobe, is involved in learning and memory. And so this leads me to my next slide, in that the brain is involved in different types of behavior. So behavior is a kind of movement in a living organism. So these behaviors have a cause and function, and I have a couple examples here. So we have a squirrel, you know, that's getting ready for winter and hibernation, so they're burying their source of food. We have some polar bears here playing or fighting. So this is a type of behavior. And then we have some human hockey players having a good time here at a game. And so these are just examples of behaviors. Other examples are things like riding a bike, or driving, cooking. So these are all behaviors. Walking. So there's areas of the brain that are involved in these different types of behaviors and creating what we call a neuronal circuit that when we learn these behaviors is made to then remember how to do them. So if you know the saying, you know, you never forget how to ride a bike. When you get on it, you remember how, you know, you're supposed to pedal and balance so that you don't fall over. And so there are these neuronal circuits that are made in the brain that help us accomplish these behaviors. So what are neurons? neurons are a major cell type in the brain, or one of the major cell types in the brain. This is just an example, a cartoon example of what a neuron looks like. So we have these things called dendrites, which pick up information from the environment, and that information that gets processed by something called the cell body. And that information is then relayed down this sort of long stick-like figure called the axon. And then that information is then sent to another neuron. So we have these neurons we have multiple neurons talking to each other at one given time, sending information. And this myelin sheath that you see around the axon is this fatty substance that helps transmit the information a lot faster. And myelin sheath is something that we see that degenerates in diseases like MS. So this is a little bit of a background or some basics about the nervous system that I thought were important to go over in order for you to understand some of the information I'll be presenting later in my presentation today. So the focus of my presentation is really aging and what happens to the brain as we age. So this is, I think, a really interesting or a great figure that I wanted to include in my talk today that goes over aging. And so I guess what I first want to say is that aging isn't a bad thing. I mean, I think it is viewed as a bad thing, but there is normal aging in the sense that cognitively, so in terms of our learning and memory systems, there are individuals that undergo normal aging and we don't see any cognitive decline. Now, there are individuals that do undergo cognitive decline, and that's outlined here. And so we have the level of cognitive decline here on the vertical part of this figure, and then time on the horizontal part. And so there are cognitive decline can be characterized loosely into these different stages. Now, not everyone is the same. And we're going to discuss why that occurs, why not everyone sort of follows this linear pattern that we see here in this diagram. So I'll just walk you through it and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So there's this preclinical stage of cognitive decline. And so there may be changes that the individual notices in their behavior, but this might not be detectable by any neurological tests that are available. And what's happening in the brain is that there are these changes that are occurring, so changes in vasculature, maybe different neuronal circuits are being lost because cells are dying, but there are no outward symptoms that can be measured, like I said, by a neurological test. The next phase is something called MCI, which stands for mild cognitive impairment. Now here what we have is we observe these symptoms starting to present. So there are cognitive changes that the individual can see in themselves, as well as that family members may be able to see. So spouses or children may be able to observe these changes. And we see changes in one or more cognitive domains. But what we do see is that there is this ability for the individual to maintain daily activities. So, to be able to go to the grocery store, and things like that, cook a meal, organize cleaning and things like that. And then over here, we have dementia. And this is a type of cognitive decline where we see this decline in cognitive function that impacts daily life. So, the individual might not be able to drive anymore or remember where they parked their car, or, like on a regular basis. I sometimes don't remember to park my car, but that's just because the parking lot's super busy and I'm thinking about a billion things. But anyway, so if you're not able to remember where you parked your car, that's not indicating that you have dementia. But, if there's a consistent pattern where an individual is not able to perform their daily activities, that the cognitive impairment is severe enough to interfere with these everyday abilities, that is when dementia can potentially be diagnosed using clinical tests. Now, there are different levels of dementia. There's mild, moderate, severe, and severe. Now, some individuals, as they undergo aging, may possess this preclinical level of cognitive decline until, the end of their life, and they may not progress on to MCI or dementia, whereas others may progress to MCI and then that's it. So it's variable for every different person, and it's not this linear pattern, but in terms of this neurodegenerative process, this occurs over time. And this is sort of how it's been classified. So, when I first started this slide, I talked about aging and how it's not a bad thing. So I want to talk about healthy aging, and that is still a possibility. And we see that in several individuals around the world. And so, okay. So we know there are these individuals that are super agers. So they're people that live beyond the age of 100. And so, research has been done on these individuals to see, why are they able to live past 100, and, do they have any protective factors? And there is some data looking at genetics. So, our genes, our DNA, our sort of basic instructions that make us up. And there are changes in different genes that have been described in these populations. And one example is this cholesterol esterase transfer gene that's been shown to be protective against cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. And so there are these protective factors. So like what I said before, aging is not necessarily a bad thing, because there is healthy aging. And then there's this idea of cognitive reserve. So we see this sometimes in twin studies or, in individuals. So you have, person 1 and person 2, they have the same pathology in terms of, what we see in their brain. But person 1 may present with clinical symptoms and person 2 might not. So, they have this damage or these changes in their brain, but why are they not presenting with the same symptoms? Now, there's a lot of ideas about why this occurs, and one of them is cognitive reserve, which we'll talk a bit about next. But there are also these biological, genetic and environmental differences that occur between individuals. And we know that genetics plays an important role in aging, and with the movement towards personalized medicine in our healthcare today, we understand that importance. And then there's also these environmental differences. So we know that the environment plays a huge role in aging. So, where we live and the amount of stress that we have to deal with. And then there's also susceptibility. So I'm going to talk a bit about cognitive reserve. So cognitive reserve is based on this hypothesis that those with more experiential resources, so with more education or knowledge, exhibit a higher level of cognitive function. And so this is a hypothesis, it's a working sort of model. And so these individuals may see a delay in the effects of aging because, they have a higher level of education, they may exercise. We know that exercise is beneficial. The literature shows us time and time again, any form of physical activity is really great for recovery after stroke, for maintaining a healthy lifestyle, staying engaged. So reading, doing things like that. Social interactions are really important, and diet. And we're going to talk a bit more about diet later on. So these are ideas in terms of what cognitive reserve might be doing in terms of helping with aging. healthy. And what, the results show from this research, the individuals that have looked into cognitive reserve, the results suggest that cognitive reserve reflects the persistence of early differences in cognitive function rather than differential rates of age-associated cognitive decline. So it's the early experiences that these researchers have found to be beneficial in the aging process. There was a really cool study done here in the US by the National Institutes of Aging. It was a nun study, and it was conducted in about 678 Roman Catholic nuns they were aged 75 to 107. This is a nice homogeneous group of individuals because we know that there's no drug use, little to no alcohol. They live in the similar environment, so similar housing. They have similar reproductive histories. So this is a really nice controlled experiment in terms of looking at what happens in humans. And so what the researchers did is they assessed writing samples from these women. So these women wrote autobiographical essays. And what the researchers found was that the essays that were lacking in linguistic density were a higher predictor of developing Alzheimer's disease. So there was an approximate 92% accuracy in predicting Alzheimer's disease by looking at these autobiographical essays and looking at the linguistic density. And the traits in early, mid, and late life have these strong relationships in terms of the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So something that's really interesting to mention here is that these Alzheimer's disease, dementia, all of these are neurodegenerative processes. So they take a long time to occur. So there's, cell death. In Parkinson's disease, we know that disease affects a specific type of cell in the brain. These neurons that produce something called dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter is a chemical that neurons use to talk to each other or to communicate with each other. And we know that at least 60% of these cells need to die before any symptoms are detected. So we know in Parkinson's disease, there are these significant motor impairments and this tremor, so this constant shaking, this impaired gait, and we're gonna go through that a little bit later on in lecture. But it takes a long time for this to occur. So what neuroscientists that study neurodegeneration think is that these changes are actually happening a lot earlier in life, and then the presentation or the symptom onset occurs later in life. Okay, so we've talked about cognitive impairment or cognitive decline, and we know that this increases as we age. So dementia affects about 1 in 50 people between the ages of 65 to 70, and then it goes up to 1 in 5 on people that are above 80 years old. Now there's different types of dementia, so I want to go through those. Dementia is like an umbrella term, and so there are a range of symptoms like we've talked about with that figure that I showed you, it can go from mild to severe. But overall, what we see in the patients with dementia is that there's this impaired cognitive capacity. So here we have the different types of dementia. So we have Alzheimer's disease, which is the predominant form of dementia. It affects about 50 to 75% of dementia, individuals diagnosed with dementia. So we know that we'll go through the characteristics of these different types. And then vascular dementia is about 20 to 30%. So what is vascular dementia? Well, it's a change in how blood flow occurs in the brain, or how much blood we get to the brain. And so it's an alteration in that. So vasculature refers to the blood flow and the pattern of flow. We also have, there's a type of dementia called Lewy body dementia. Some individuals with Parkinson's disease develop these Lewy bodies, so these deposits of protein within the brain, which then lead to a type of dementia. There's also the frontal temporal lobe dementia, or the frontal temporal type of dementia, which we sometimes see in patients that have suffered from traumatic brain injury early in life. Okay, so Alzheimer's disease is shown here. It's quite well characterized in terms of the pathology. So we see this accumulation of these plaques that are called beta amyloid plaques. We see neural fibrillary tangles. We also see, a loss of synapses and neurons. And here we can see an individual, their brain tissue. You can see, that there is this reduction in the size of the brain. So you can see in outline here, there's a healthy brain, and then you can see an Alzheimer's disease brain, the shrunken brain with Alzheimer's disease. We also see these plaques around the neurons. So we see dying neurons, and you can see a healthy neuron here. And we see tangles as well in the brain tissue. And so vascular dementia is after Alzheimer's disease is another major form of dementia. So there is a, reduced blood flow to the brain, changes to the blood flow. And you can see here blood vessels and the pattern of them and how it possibly changes in vascular dementia. Now, vascular dementia can be a result of strokes. There are these strokes that are called silent strokes that occur, and they kind of are like what the name says. They're silent in the sense that they happen, but there's no symptoms. There's no aphasia, no loss of motor function, no sort of measurable behavioral symptom, but there are these slight changes that start to occur in the brain that can then make the brain more susceptible to damage. So to a larger stroke, or start changing the vasculature in the brain. So we've talked about sort of a general overview of these diseases of aging. Now, what happens at the cellular level? So I've talked a bit about neurons, one of the cell types in the brain. What happens to these cells in these disease states? There's a lot of hypotheses, so a lot of ideas about how the cells in the brain are changed, or the damage that they occur over our lifespan to make them more susceptible to damage. And I'm going to try, I'm going to go over some of these mechanisms to give you an idea of what might be happening in the brain at the very cellular level. So there is this hypothesis about oxidative stress, in that we accumulate oxidative stress throughout our life. This then damages our neurons or our brain tissue. And so what is oxidative stress? So I have a diagram here on the top left. We have a stable molecule that has all of its electrons, so it's super happy, it's just hanging out. And then we have an unstable molecule here, so something called a free radical that isn't very happy, that wants to be, like the stable molecule, but can't because it doesn't have all of its electrons. And so exposures to various things in the environment, different types of foods, things like that, are thought to promote oxidative stress and to create these free radicals, or these unstable molecules. And I think some of you might have heard about antioxidants. And what antioxidants do is they go and they provide these electrons to these free radicals, or these really unstable molecules. So you can see that sort of here. We have these really, so this is in a cell. So we have the cellular membrane here. And then we have these damaging free radicals floating around in the cytosol of the cell. And we have these little happy guys, these antioxidants, that are providing this extra electron or extra electrons to these unstable molecules, making them stable again. And the hypothesis here is that these unstable molecules or free radicals, they are going around making damage, and so by impairing neuronal function, causing neurons to die, things like that, and sort of wreaking havoc in our brain. And the antioxidants are going in to help these free radicals not do that, or help our normal function in terms of making these unstable molecules stable again. So, there's a lot of antioxidant food items that people sometimes emphasize. So things like dark chocolate, red wine, blueberries, green tea are all examples of antioxidants. And so there is this hypothesis for neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, that the vascular dementia, that there is this oxidative stress that is built up over our lifespan that then leads to some sort of damage. Now, I've briefly mentioned DNA. So DNA is the building block of life, and it's basically our blueprint, our instructions that we're built on. And we have cells that divide in different areas of our body, in our brain as well, another cell type called astrocytes or glia cells. So these cells are continuously dividing, and so that means that our DNA is being copied and put into these new cells. And so there is this hypothesis that sometimes what happens as we age is that there is more DNA damage that's accumulates in these cells that have divided, over and over again. And there is this decline in DNA repair mechanisms to remove this DNA damage, because our body does, our body is amazing, and we have lots of sort of safety checks in the sense that, when DNA is copied, there's sort of this proofreading mechanism that goes in and makes sure that the DNA is correct, and that there aren't any mistakes. If there are mistakes, it's corrected. But these mechanisms are thought to sort of deteriorate over time and then lead to this increase in DNA damage, and so then things don't work as well. And so these are just some ideas or some hypotheses. So I guess ideas and theories that scientists are using to investigate how to make therapeutics or targets to reduce the burden of these age-associated diseases. So we're going to switch to, sort of topics a little bit, or I guess transition into nutrition and how nutrition plays a role in some of these age-related diseases. So as adults, we eat about 2,000 pounds of food per year. We eat because we're hungry. We need energy to do things, to give a lecture like I am, to work out, to, perform our job, to be parents, to be grandparents. We need energy to do things. And our body also needs nutrients and vitamins in order for optimal function. And our organs, so our liver, our heart, our brain, all of our intestine, our lungs, all of these organs require energy to function and to do what they need to do. And you can see that here in terms of the basal energy requirements for organs. So our muscles, our skeletal muscles require energy, our kidneys, our heart, our fat, our adipose tissue, our liver requires energy, our brain requires a lot of energy. Neurons are very energy consuming cells, and other parts of our body also require energy. And so we get this energy, these nutrients, these vitamins from what we eat. And so that is, one of the main reasons we eat. It's also really nice to eat good food. I'm a big fan of good food. I think most people are. And so, it's also a fun social thing to, sit with people and have food that you really like. Right now, it's a little bit of a tricky time with the pandemic, but, hopefully soon we'll all be able to enjoy eating with our family and our friends. and enjoying, lots of good food and social times. And, there is a hot topic in science right now, and that is the connection between the microbiome, so our gut, and the bacteria in our gut, and how that relates to health and disease. And, I think every sort of discipline in the biomedical sciences is looking at how the gut interacts with the heart function, brain function, and things like that. So obviously I'm giving a talk about brain. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the microbiome is thought to be involved in in the disease called Parkinson's. And so this is just a summary figure looking at how brain function and behavior are all impacted. So we, like I mentioned, we have the gut, or the enteric nervous system. So that is that whole system in the gut. And, we have different systems. We have the immune system, and they all interact. The HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic axis, which is involved in the stress response. We have inflammation and the different cytokines that are involved, and they all are interacting with the brain and behavior. And so when I first started off doing neuroscience research, I always thought the brain was this isolated region. Nothing would impact it because we had the blood-brain barrier, that prevented a lot of things from coming into the brain. But really, the brain is this dynamic structure that interacts with so many different systems in our body that it's really cool. How what we've eaten, or how stressed we are, really do impact how our brain functions. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about Parkinson's disease and its and a few new hypotheses or ideas of the actual onset of Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is a disease that, like I mentioned before, it impacts a specific cell type in our brain. So these neurons that produce something called dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. And about 60% of our dopamine cells need to die before an individual presents with symptoms that are characterized by Parkinson's disease. So some of the symptoms include this rigidity or postural instability. There are these walking difficulties, or these gait difficulties. So this like shuffle when they move. There are these tremors. We also see dementia in some Parkinson's patients. And so there are all of these changes that occur. Michael J. Fox is an actor who suffers from Parkinson's disease and has set up a foundation to do research on Parkinson's disease to understand, why it, sort of what brings the onset of Parkinson's disease, and, potential therapeutics. So you can see him when he is, I think most recently, from what I remember, was in The Good Wife, which is quite an older show. But anyway, you could see when he was acting, you could see his tremor and his difficulties in talking. And so that is a classical Parkinson's disease patient. And so what new research suggests is that there is this dysfunction in the GI tract, so in our digestive tract, that occurs before the onset of Parkinson's disease. And so there are these changes in the bacteria within our gut, and these changes in the bacteria produce these short chain fatty acids, so these molecules that then penetrate our blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation in the brain, leading to this death of dopamine cells and levels of other proteins called alpha-synuclein, which are characteristic of Parkinson's disease. And so there's been a lot of research looking at this change in the GI tract, several years or decades before the onset of Parkinson's disease, thinking that's where the changes start, and then those changes migrate to the brain, causing these changes or this cell death in dopamine cells. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about a study that was done in the United Kingdom, which I think is really cool. And it's looking at folic acid. So folic acid is a B vitamin. It's a B vitamin that's well known for its role for women that are of childbearing age to take, because it helps with the closure of the neural tube in the developing baby. So the neural tube is a tube that becomes the brain and the spinal cord of the baby. And so proper closing of it is really important so that subsequent development can be achieved. And so in North America, so in both in the US and Canada, we supplement, or we have folate fortification in our diet in order to reduce neural tube defects in the population. And this was in place in 1998 in both countries, but there are countries worldwide that don't fortify their grains or their or milk or things like that with folate. And so this study that I'm going to present was done in the United Kingdom, where they don't. And what the researchers did is from 2004 to 2006, they had patients with mild cognitive impairment and patients without, so controls. What they did is they treated the individuals with placebo, so just like a sugar pill, or a group of patients were given folic acid and vitamin B12 in tablet form. And they took this for 2 years. And what happened was the researchers were able to use MRI, so magnetic resonance imaging, which is a technique to image the brain in a person that's alive. So you can look at changes in structure. Sometimes MRIs can look at stroke and where you might see a stroke occurred in a certain area. And so these individuals underwent MRI imaging. And what the researchers did is they looked at brain atrophy. So what that means is the loss of brain tissue. So we know that the brain is made up of neurons, so and as well as other cell types like astrocytes. And so what the researchers were able to do was quantify the amount of cell or atrophy of the brain, the total volume. So I'm just going to show you this image here. So we have an individual here on the right. So panel A is a control individual. So this individual was given a placebo pill, so maybe just sugar or something like that. And you can see different colors. You can see blue, you can see orange, yellow, dark blue. And these are areas where the researchers observed brain atrophy. So they observed a loss of brain tissue. And over here in panel B, so on the right, you can see an individual that was given this B vitamin supplementation, so folic acid and vitamin B12 for 2 years. And you can see some colors, you can see blue and red, but you can see less colors on the panel in B, because what the researchers found was that there was actually less brain atrophy in these individuals that were given this B vitamin supplementation for 2 years compared to the placebo group. And so this was a really interesting study in the sense that it showed some sort of dietary intervention resulting in less cell death or less brain atrophy in older individuals that were already, experiencing some sort of cognitive decline. And there have been other studies done. China in 2015, there was a randomized controlled study that was published looking at folic acid supplementation in individuals that were hypertensive. So they already had high blood pressure. So we already know that this is a risk factor for developing a stroke or some sort of cardiovascular event that's negative. And so what these individuals, what the researchers did is they supplemented, in addition to an ACE inhibitor, they gave a group of individuals folic acid as well as a pharmaceutical treatment like an ACE inhibitor. And they found the individuals that had the folic acid actually had had less prevalence in developing a stroke, which is really interesting. And again, China is a country that doesn't fortify with folic acid, so they're not constantly getting it. So how is this applicable to us, people that are living in a country that has mandatory folic acid fortification? So our grains have folate, our milk has folate, so we're all likely getting enough folate. Well, there are other B vitamins that and other components that individuals in North America become deficient in. So there's something called vitamin B12, excuse me. And this is something that has been shown that individuals in North America, and in countries that have folate fortification have low levels of, and that's because of the whole aging process. So the metabolism of vitamin B12 requires something called intrinsic factor, which is a molecule that breaks it down and makes it absorbable by our intestine. And we see a decline in intrinsic factor as we age. We also have, older individuals also have more inflammation in their stomach, and that leads to malabsorption of vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is a vitamin that we get from animal products. And so it's something that we can't generate enough by ourselves. And these individuals that are vitamin B12 deficient, show worse outcome after stroke and things like that. And so, this research, is looking at folic acid and vitamin B12, and it is definitely applicable to our population in the US, in Canada, and North America, because there are other nutrients that we, have trouble with as we age. And here what I have is just a map of the world. It's a little bit old, it's from 2015, but it's highlighted in blue countries where we see mandatory folic acid fortification. So we see it, in all of North America, South America, Australia, and some parts of Africa. Not a lot of Europe actually fortifies with folic acid. I know that the UK is currently considering it because of its important role in neural tube defects, as well as a couple of other countries in Europe. But this is just a representation here. And, Alzheimer's disease is something I quickly want to touch on, in that it is a very complex disease. There's a lot of ideas of how it's caused, and a lot of research has been done looking at, what's beneficial for individuals in terms of nutrition, for individuals that are suffering from Alzheimer's disease and the risk of it or the incidence of it. And we can see, the research is inconclusive here. You can see, fruits, heavy tea, we're not sure whether, it helps or doesn't help. And so this research is ongoing. And I just have a quick video that I wanted to show you. Play that. Whoops. Okay.
Essential nutrients are components in food that your body can't make on its own, and that we need to grow, function, and stay healthy. So we must get these nutrients through our diets. There are 6 classes of essential nutrients. Carbohydrates are the main source of calories or energy in the diet. Fats also give us energy and help with normal growth and development, immune function, vitamin absorption, hormone production, and more. Proteins and the amino acids they are made of are major structural components of our body's cells and are responsible for building and repair of tissues and maintenance of muscle and lean body mass. There are 13 essential vitamins which have important jobs, such as keeping our nerves healthy, helping us resist infection, assisting with blood clotting, and keeping our metabolism running. Minerals are only needed in small amounts, but play a vital role in muscle contraction, fluid balance, food digestion, bone building, blood pressure regulation, and more. Water is also an essential nutrient that delivers other nutrients to cells, regulates the body temperature, acts as a shock absorber and lubricant, and helps in the removal of waste from the body. Bioactive compounds are not considered essential because they haven't been shown to lead to deficiencies if they're missing in the diet. However, they may positively impact health. Bioactives are a big part of nutrition research as scientists are trying to better understand and unlock their potential health benefits. Bioactives that you have likely heard of are carotenoids. These colorful plant pigments found in bright red, yellow, and orange fruits and vegetables act as powerful antioxidants and may help prevent some types of cancer and heart disease, reduce the risk of eye disease, enhance the immune system, and more. Resveratrol is another bioactive found in the skin of grapes, blueberries, raspberries, and mulberries that may reduce the risk of heart disease. Flavonols are a part of the flavonoid family that are found in tea, red wine, and cocoa and may positively influence our cardiovascular health. Phytosterols are steroid compounds in plants that may lower cholesterol and improve cardiovascular health. Phytoestrogens, found in many plants including soy and other legumes, are also being studied for their potential in reducing the risk of breast cancer. Healthy eating is important at every age, but the amount of nutrients we need and our body's ability to process them can change over time and depend on your personal health status. As you age, you may need more vitamin D and calcium for bone health, more B12 for brain and blood health, and more fiber for a healthy digestive system. Some people may also need more water as their sense of thirst declines. Your medical conditions or the medications you take may also require you to adjust your diet. It's important to talk with your healthcare team when deciding the best nutrition plan for you, but most people can get the healthy nutrients they need from a well-rounded diet of nutrient-rich fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, such as those recommended in the U.S. dietary guidelines. Some people with deficiencies, certain diseases and conditions, or with evolving nutritional needs at different stages of life may consider dietary supplements to add missing nutrition to their diets. Supplements include vitamins, minerals, herbals and botanicals, amino acids, enzymes, and bioactives. You may be one of the many adults that takes a dietary supplement of some kind, but do you know enough about what is safe and what you can trust? Too often what's popular one day seems to make headlines the next for being unsafe. The Food and Drug Administration that regulates the safety and effectiveness of our drugs and medical devices also regulates dietary supplements, but supplements are not regulated as strictly as drugs because they have been considered to be more like food than drugs. For example, companies don't need to get approval before producing or selling their supplements, and don't have to provide evidence to support their claims about the product before marketing them. There are many safe dietary supplement options out there that can keep you healthy and even improve your health, but there are others that may not be safe for you. This makes being an informed consumer important. When choosing a supplement, talk to your healthcare team about all the prescription and OTC medications you are taking and all of the supplements. They can advise you on their safety as well as how they might interact with your medications. Avoid mega doses of supplements, which may be more than your body needs and even cause you harm. Keep in mind that the term natural doesn't always mean safe. And watch out for claims that seem too good to be true. When searching for information online, turn to trusted sources. Look for authors who are academics, experts in the field, government agency employees, and well-respected members of the medical community. Also, look to see if the claims come from studies that have been reviewed by other experts in the field. If you still have questions, ask someone from your healthcare team or visit the Office of Dietary Supplements at the National Institutes of Health. To learn more about what scientists are discovering about the role of nutrition in cardiovascular health, watch Heart Healthy Aging with Nutrition at www.agingresearch.org/nutrition.
All right, so that's a quick video. I've included the link for that video. It's available on YouTube in the handout that was emailed out, so you can rewatch it. I thought it was a really good video to sort of summarize that, nutrition is really complex. What we eat interacts with, what medications we take and all of that. And so, we've touched a little bit on nutrition today and how it impacts brain health, and it also impacts other aspects of our health as well. So this is just a quick summary of what we discussed today. So we talked about neuroscience, how the brain is organized. The brain is made up of neurons and how they communicate. The brain takes over 20 years to develop. The brain ages differently for everyone, and nutrition is important for normal brain function as well as for aging. And there are nutritional links to neurodegenerative diseases, so Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. And in terms of future learning, these were also included in the handout. Some colleagues and I put together a lay language book called The Role of Nutrition During Aging. And this covers a number of age-related diseases. And what we've done is we've summarized peer-reviewed studies or evidence-based information and compiled it for different diseases. This book is available on Amazon. There are also various other avenues to learn more about nutrition. So there's more academic texts here. There is a website by run out of Canada, Calgary, Alberta, called Neuronutrition that looks at real life help with implementing nutrition into your life. There's also some really cool layperson information out there. There's a YouTube channel called Neurotransmissions if you're interested in learning more about neuroscience. And one of my former students actually runs an Alzheimer's disease blog. So what she does is she takes studies that have been published, so peer-reviewed published studies, so this evidence-based information, and she writes the results up in a layperson format. So it's easy to digest in terms of the different information that comes out about Alzheimer's disease. So that's a really great blog to follow. And then just a couple of books. The Brain That Changes Itself is a great book about, how our brain is very plastic and changes, throughout our lifespan. And, our brain is also really great at compensating and learning to compensate. Another book by a neurologist, Anton Hakim, describes 7 ways or 7 rules to avoid dementia. Anton Hakim is a neuroscientist, a Canadian neurologist, that put this book out a few years ago. That it's quite a good read. So these are all ideas for future learning that were included in the handout that was sent out. So I want to thank you all for attending, and hopefully you've learned a little bit, and I'll pass it back on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jadavji. That was just a wealth of great information. And I have to say that the librarian in me loves the bibliography at the end of your talk, and that you could recommend so many cool books. And you did mention Michael J. Fox, and I don't know if everybody knows that he just put out a new book in November. It's called, what is that called? No Time Like the Future. And I see that it's getting a lot of traffic here at the library. So if you're a Michael J. Fox fan or interested in his story, that would be something for you to check out at the library or pick up on your own. It's called No Time Like the Future. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. I see one here. Do you advocate for a whole food plant-based diet? And have you read studies from Doctors Sherzai? Sherzai.
I have not read articles from that doctor. I'll have to look them up. I'm just writing there. Okay, in terms of a plant-based diet, I'm not sure that I can answer yes or no whether I advocate for it. Diet is such a personal thing, and everyone has different conditions or different things that they need to consider. So it's really important, to discuss this with your healthcare provider and see that you can, meet the requirements that your body needs by maintaining this diet. Like I mentioned in my lecture, vitamin B12 is something that's obtained from animal products. And sometimes individuals that are vegetarians or that, maintain this plant-based diet miss out on the vitamin B12. And so this can have severe consequences in terms of memory function, as well as other things like red blood cell function. And so it's really important to make an informed decision and to look at, how you can, maintain a healthy body and with this diet, and to make sure you cover all your bases. Because missing out on essential vitamins and nutrients can be, a potential concern. But, it can be remedied by doing, speaking to people and understanding, the challenges that come with these different diets, either, omnivore or carnivore diets. So.
Okay. Thanks for that. There's another question that came up. This viewer asks, I recently read that the appendix could be problematic in Parkinson's disease, and that individuals who had appendectomies saw a decline in Parkinson's disease because there were high levels of, I don't know this word, alpha
Synuclein, maybe?
yes, in appendices in general. Do you have any ideas or thoughts on this?
Huh. I did not know about that. That's really interesting.
So individuals who had appendectomy saw a decline in Parkinson's disease.
Interesting. I will, I don't know. This is the first time I've heard about it. I'll need to look that up. I will learn something new today.
You know how you mentioned dementia, and then you listed those 4 types of dementia. Where does PD fit into that? Is PD a form of dementia, or is that something different?
So Parkinson's disease, there is some individuals with Parkinson's disease that develop this dementia, a Lewy body dementia, because they have these deposits of alpha-synuclein, which leads to a form of dementia.
Okay.
For sure. But the appendix is really interesting. Thanks for that question.
Yeah. So I don't see any other questions, and we're actually a couple minutes over time, but I just want to thank you so much. I think your lecture has been so fascinating for me. And, I just love learning about the brain, because that's where it all goes down for us in this experience of life. And so the more I can learn about it, the better. And I'm definitely going to take a look at your bibliography, because it kind of made me hungry to follow up and kind of learn some more on this topic. So just thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise with the community. It's been really great having you. And just want to remind everybody that this is a monthly lecture series, and so we'll be back here again February 16th, and the topic of that lecture is Rare Diseases, Not So Rare After All, and that's brought to us by Dr. Burnworth. So keep that in mind, and hopefully we'll see you next month. So thank you again, and I'm going to end the meeting now, and everybody take care of themselves, and hopefully we'll all be super agers with healthy brains. So take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.